we have to start thinking about just treating our kids like humans. But that doesn't mean like we're treating them as our equals, right? And that's the thing about when we talk about being Latino and bringing.
Hola, hola, Alex. How are you?
Hola, good. I'm good. How are you doing this morning?
I am great. As long as I have a cup of coffee, I feel great.
Yeah, me too. I
This is what
understand
I
that.
need.
I think all parents understand that.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to be here. I know you as an educator and just like someone that is very involved in the community as well, in the school specifically, being that you work at my son's school, which is amazing. And so you presented on a session about restorative practices in parenting, and I'm like, I need to have Alex on the show because everything that you shared really resonated with me, but especially coming from the Latino perspective and the father perspective, I really wanted you to be here so that you can share your experiences and kind of like your background as well and your transition into this, especially once you became a dad. So, in
Absolutely.
this Father's Day episode, I am really excited to bring the Latino dad perspective because it's so important, especially for those who are raising children where we are intentional in breaking generational cycles, right? So, before we delve into the conversation, I would love for you to introduce yourself. If you can tell our listeners a little bit more about your background, your family, and everything in between.
Absolutely. And I think it kind of all ties into, my philosophy being in education. It all has to do with my background from how I was raised to school to work to everything. And so, yeah. So I think the big thing is I'm first generation. My dad's from Cuba. He came over in 1980. Mariel, Mariel boat lift. And then my mom is from Mexico. She's from Michoacan, and they met here in Chicago. And so I think that's a key component of my, like I said, how I deal with kids and even my own children. And so I was born in Chicago, and we lived here for a while, and then we kind of moved. And then when I was around 5, we moved to the northwest suburbs. We moved to Des Plaines, and then I lived there. And then I went to Northeastern University for my undergrad, and then I eventually got my master's in educational leadership. But I taught in Little Village, which is a predominantly Latino neighborhood in Chicago, and I taught there for 8 or 9 years, and I loved it. But eventually I wanted to kind of move into administrative work, and so I did leave. And then I have been a dean now for 9 years. So in total, I've been in Chicago public schools for 17 years. And
Oh,
then even before that, I was a camp counselor for like 8 years, so
mhm.
overnight camp and all that kind of stuff. So there's that, my professional side. But then the personal side, I do have 2 children of my own. I have a 4-year-old, Violeta, and then I have a 1.5-year-old named Felix. Yeah. And so, I think all those different components, my personal components and the professional ones combined have kind of shaped my philosophy and just how even I deal personally with my kids.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. First of all, you come from an education background. So and the fact that you have been with children, right? You understand their experiences, you are more empathetic, to why they do the things that they do,
Yeah.
right?
When I talk about the camps and stuff, because people are like, well, why do you always mention camps? And I'm like, honestly, for me as an educator, those early days when I was taking those pedagogy, those college courses, at the same time, I was an overnight, I was doing camps in the summer. And the thing is, I was like, I tell people I'm like the Jane Goodall of teenagers, because when you're at a camp, you live among them, you're in the cabin. So, I think some people, they get their degree and then they kind of jump into the classroom. But while I was studying a lot of these, like I said, the pedagogy and the theories and stuff, I was applying them. I cracked a
Mhm.
couple eggs, but being at the camp, you're with the kids constantly. You really start to learn and get to know how they interact and stuff. And so, I think that was definitely where this whole journey, kind of kicked off.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it, and especially as you as first gen, you have a unique perspective. I think you could be more understanding towards other, students who also come from that background, right, who are first generation, and as someone who is a product of CPS myself, the Chicago Public Schools, I was able to tell who was understanding of my lived experiences versus those that were not. And that made a huge impact in terms of connecting with educators that really understood where I came from. Like, why is it that I don't know certain systems and why I didn't have the capital compared to other peers. And so that is such a huge piece and component when you're thinking about why is it that some students make certain decisions or, why do they react a certain way versus others? And yeah, that makes a huge difference. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think a lot of times people don't take into perspective the whole student, and so I
Mhm.
do bring that up. So, you know, going to school and displays, I'm grateful for it and it gave me a lot of opportunities. But at the same time, at least at that time, there were not tons of Latinos in elementary school or middle school. High school a little bit more, but even then, it was definitely, that's kind of where my journey, also my identity, and just Latinidad is the quote unquote Latinidad. Am I Latino enough? But that's where it began because I was either, and I know a lot of people experience this, either not Latino enough for the Latinos or too Latino for the whites and Caucasians. And so it was just kind of code switching is what it,
Yeah.
now I know it's a skill. At the time, I'm like, oh man, oh man. But now I know it's an actual skill called
Right.
code switching, right? Being able
Right.
to have that ability to go between both worlds, both cultures, languages, slang, everything, right? Even,
Yeah.
and so bringing that now to my career and just realizing like, yeah, you see a kid and you realize there's a lot more to that kid. There's a lot more
Mhm.
depth and there's so many things that are affecting them and what's going on.
Absolutely. Oh, wow. Yeah, and we're definitely gonna delve into that, but more so on the parent perspective.
For sure.
So, as an educator and a dad, could you share your journey into restorative practices? And first of all, what is that? What
Sure.
is restorative
Yeah.
practice?
So, restorative practices aren't just, it's not just for education. Really, if we want to
Mm,
take it to this next level, why I became a dean and started becoming interesting in this, you know, we have to, we have to be frank, right? And unfortunately, there's a disproportionate number of people of color, especially males, prison. It's what
mhm,
we call that pipeline, the
mhm,
school to prison pipeline,
mhm,
right? And so, the last 30 years, I would say more or less, there's been a lot of research and just work on how do we prevent that. And so restorative practices began of how do we use different theories and philosophies to get to the root cause of a behavior, right? We know that these things are happening, but instead of we're just going to lock someone up and do that, let's actually get to the root cause. Let's give them help. Let's help rehabilitate, right? Well, taking that and it's like, okay, well, let's really get to the root then. Well, the root
mm,
is what kind of foundation, educational foundation are they getting? What kinds of supports? So taking that philosophy of restorative practices or the idea of getting to the root cause of something or focusing on rehabilitation, you take it and you apply to school. So that's kind of a little bit of background
mm,
on this term, restorative practices. In terms of my journey, I really feel like there's maybe 3 or 4 kind of milestones or keystones for me, as I was thinking about it. And I think the first thing is my own growth. And I know we can delve into that more because a lot of people ask me, like, okay, my kid is always doing this and they're doing that, or like, what's the secret? What's the magic wand? There's no magic wand,
mm,
but it starts with you, and people hate
mm,
hearing that.
mhm,
And the thing is, I'm not talking like a 5 minute, like, oh, well, okay, I'm going to do this because no, I'm talking therapy. I'm talking lifelong reflection, right? And
mhm,
so for me, even before I knew what restorative practices were, or even before I knew what education was, when I was starting college and in high school, a lot of it was just like, man, my parents talked to me this certain way, or this is how we communicated. I don't like that. It was
Yeah.
me in my relationships, my college, high school girlfriend, being defensive all the time and
Mm.
realizing, oh, I'm defensive because in my household, when we would argue, it wasn't about coming with a solution. It was about how can I hurt that other person? So at home, we model our communication styles. We model how to have an argument. And so then, me on myself, just thinking about in my interactions with my wife and getting to the root cause of why am I defensive? Why do I, automatically try to turn things and blame her? And why do
Mhm.
these things happen? So that's one component. Even before I knew I was doing it, or before I would call it restorative practices, I've always been trying to reflect to better myself, right? That's the first
Mhm.
component. I think the second keystone was when I was a high school teacher in Little Village. I did this curriculum. I was a social science teacher, but once a week, I would do what we call like a social emotional learning, or
Mm.
a curriculum that focuses on, once again, the whole student, like their well-being, right? And so this particular, coincidentally enough, it was about podcasting, right? But it wasn't really about podcasting. It was about listening. And
Mm.
the key thing being, whether it's a kid or an adult or your spouse, is that listening is not the same as hearing. You can hear a sound, but listening is the processing of that, right?
Yes.
And so when I would do this class with the kids, I would it was a prepackaged lesson. I would do it. But then I sat there and I started like actually participating. And then I started opening up about my background, right, with the
Yeah.
kids. And then what I realized was putting in the time that once a week, it wasn't social science. It wasn't what I was doing the rest of the week, but on Fridays, doing that, the other 4 days, those students were ready to do what I asked them. And it's because we made that connection. And so that kind of clicked, because then I'm like, okay, there's something to focusing on the root cause. There's something to taking time out and just talking to the kids and making that connection. Them seeing me as human, me seeing them as human, and then making connections and then tying it to that first component of my
Mhm.
own reflection. Because it was literally through that teaching that class that I started my own growth as to why I was how I was in my relationships. The
Yeah.
importance of listening, the importance of sometimes not speaking,
Yeah.
right? How many of us, when we're in a discussion and argument, we already know what we're going to say? Well, how can you already know what you're going to say if you're not, you know, I did improv for a while in Chicago and I
Okay.
loved it. Even that, right? I learned like you have to listen. You may have an idea for the scene, but that does not matter. Like you can still honor it and do it, but how are you going to meld it with what the other person's saying, right? And
Right.
so I think that was the second keystone. That's where things started to connect as an educator in the early days, right? So fast forward, I become an administrator, and I was I wanted to be a dean or some kind of quote unquote disciplinarian. And so in those early days, I went to a lot of different trainings, and that's when I really jumped into the swimming pool. And what I noticed was there was some discipline, professional developments, and I'm like, okay, but I was really getting into the social emotional ones. I was really, you know, as a dean, obviously, I've learned a lot from the principal and assistant principal. They are probably the best administrators I've ever met, right?
Mhm.
But in terms of the restorative component, one of the best just teachers or people I ever had, it was a social worker. And she had
Mhm.
done it for like 30 years. And I learned so much from her in terms of mental health and the whole student and getting to the root cause of why things happen, right? And so it was through there that I learned about peace circles. That's a way to de-escalate a situation, right? I learned about restorative conversation. So restorative practices is the umbrella that everything falls under, all these different theories and strategies you can use to get to the whole child, right? To help them.
Sure.
But restorative conversations is an even more specific way of how do you speak to a kid? How do you get to the root cause? And so you mix that all in, You mix it from my reflection on my own life, mixed with my professional aspects, mixed with, the training, and then practice. I mean, the one thing is, I think I'm pretty humble, and like I'm just a guy. I'm just a dad, happened to be in the right place at the right time, who kind of went into this career. And the only difference between me and anyone else is I've practiced. Like, 17 years I've been in education. I've
Yeah.
probably, I hundreds, if not, a little over thousands of kids. So I've had practice. So it doesn't mean I'm better at it. I just, trust me, I've had more practice. And with my own kid, that all goes out the window. Like, so, because like I said, I'm just a guy that but trust me, there are days where I'm like, I get real old school, and I'm like, well, where's my chancla? And like, so the thing is, but that's what growth is. It's
Mhm.
taking ownership and knowing your flaws, and then going from there.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of so what I often say here on the podcast and really through my platform is that there's this shame and guilt, right? We feel guilty of doing all of the things that we are doing against our kids. And we just want to be the perfect mom, we want to be the perfect parent, but in reality, we are also healing in this process because it does take a lot of reflection on the way that we grew up, on the way that we were modeled really
Yeah.
after the adults in our families. And it's such a process, and I have never been so triggered in my life until I had kids. And that's when I'm like, "Wow." And I always used to say, like, I had a perfect childhood. I had such a great childhood. And yes, I would say that, yes, I did. But in terms of when I encounter certain situations with Diego specifically, who is 4, I just don't realize how triggered I get, and then I reflect, and I'm like, "Wow, it's because my mom used to scream at me. That's why I get triggered whenever Diego screams at me."
Yeah.
And it's not because my mom would say it in a disciplinary way, I just think my mom yells a lot,
Yeah.
and with all the noise, and it is overstimulating, and I just don't know how to
Yeah.
react, and I get
My
triggered by it.
I was telling you that my dad's Cuban, and so, like, and when I'm on the phone, people, we speak Spanish, and people are like, "Why are you arguing?" And I'm like, "I'm not. We're just talking. We're not arguing. What do you mean? Why are we?" You know what I mean? And so I totally get that. To your point, I think the thing is, because I was thinking back on what you're saying right now, and when I was doing the presentation, and I always open the presentation with, when parents ask me. So, if people are taking notes, right? If
Mm,
there's one thing you remember from this entire podcast, or this entire conversation, write this down, tattoo it on your forearm, write it on the inside of your camisa, do what you need to. But what are you modeling? That's
mhm,
it. At the end of the day, when you're driving and someone cuts you off, how do you react? When you are talking to your partner, how are you speaking to them? When you are mad about something, a sports game, right? You're losing it because your team is losing. Well, if that's how you act for a sport, what you're teaching your kid is, like, little problems, we should react big, right? Or
mhm,
when we get angry, this is how we should react. And so I think that's the number one thing, is your kids are always watching and listening, even when you don't think they are. My
yeah,
son is 1.5, and he, if I say, clothes in the hamper, he takes the clothes and he puts it in the hamper, right? And then, I go, okay, help me feed Frankie. That's our dog. He, opens, or I help open the thing, and he gets the little thing, and, it's falling on the floor, the food, but he's doing it, you know?
right,
But once again, like I said, there are also days when I'm like, why are you crying? Like, do you not understand me? Stop. That is not every day. And that's the thing is, but at the end of the day, he's watching and seeing us. And so, he loves to clean because he has his little toy broom and everything. Kids will
yeah,
repeat what you do. And that's
right,
the key thing. If you take anything away from today, is like even your anxieties, that's the one thing that I've seen over the course of 17 years, is that we pass our anxieties on to our kids and we don't even know it.
right,
And
right,
so they then show those in school, or they demonstrate it in other aspects of life. And so, we model. And so since we do model, then I think the first step to trying to be the best parent you can is first, like you said, looking at yourself. When Violet was born, that's my oldest, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to therapy. Like, a
Mm.
lot of Latinos, like all of us, we had the mentality of like, oh, you just, put your nose to the grindstone, do what you need to do, pues para qué ese porquería, no lo tienes que hacer, etcétera,
Mhm.
But the thing is, once I did that, it changed my outlook. It changed my path. And, so that's the parenting starts with yourself. And
Yes.
what are we modeling? And are we in the right mindset to model? Right? Have we
Mhm.
tried to heal? Have we really talked about those things and try to really see why we do what we do?
Right. Yes, oh my gosh, and this is the hardest part about parenting, I think. It's
Yes.
not the newborn phase, like, I think as soon as our kids have their personality, when they build up their personality and you are dealing with another person, and I always say that as parents, we're in this position of leadership, right? We're kinda like the managers of the household, and when you're dealing with different personalities, how do you go about their way, right? How can we meet somewhere in the middle, if you will,
Mhm.
to try to resolve an issue, to, get to your point, but also respect their point as well. But it takes a lot of work. And for many of us, we grew up in this more traditional, authoritarian type of parenting approach. And to be honest, it is so hard to break. And I appreciate you sharing how, like, some days you're a respectful parent and other days you're kind
Oh, I'm
of,
old school some
yeah,
days. I'm old school, just
yeah,
straight up medieval.
exactly.
And I'm just like, you're going to sit in this chair and like, do not move. And like, you know,
Yeah.
that's parenting. That's being a human.
Exactly.
But once again, it goes back to the modeling because
Yeah.
so this is the example I use is, yes, I yell at my kid and yes, I lose it at her. And yes, sometimes she'll start crying because she's like, oh my gosh, it's what we do afterwards. And that's the thing. People think that emotions are bad. Getting mad is not a bad thing. And this is what we're noticing more and more with a lot of kids, especially post COVID, is they don't know how to navigate their emotions.
Mm.
And as parents, when they start screaming or crying, we say, stop, it's fine. Why are you crying about this and that? Or, relax, relax. And but what we need to say is, hey, 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 it's okay to be sad and you can even be mad. And if you want to stomp, stomp, but we're not going to yell because that's just disrespectful. So now what I've done is I've taken the behavior and separated from the emotion. And that's one
Mm.
of the hardest things as a Latino is because just the way or, and I don't want to paint broad strokes, but like in your more traditional families, right? That is a hard aspect where we kind of lump it all together and we're like, well, emotions, we have to be like, real kind of controlled. And, now if, there's some Vicente playing in the background and some, copas and stuff, then we can be emotional. But even that kind of thinking, but I think that's the key component of it is separating. So if like I said, if you're making bullet points listening to this, I think another thing that I've learned just through experience is separating the emotion from the behavior and
Mhm.
reminding them it's okay. Because what
Yeah.
we're doing is we're teaching them to push the emotion away. So now
Yeah.
when we're not around and they have that feeling in their stomach, they're not going to know how to handle it. So we have to
Mhm.
walk them through, especially at that age. We have to walk them through the emotions and how to handle it. And then kind of going back to, so when I'm angry and I yell at her, I'll happen. But afterwards, I apologize.
Mhm.
And that's the other thing I want to bring up when we talk about Latino parents and how we do things. My wife and I have a joke. So with my mom, it's what I call the Doña Maria apology, because this is how my mom apologizes to me. Anytime we have an argument from when this is how she apologized. Es que hijo, tú sabes que te quiero y todo lo que hago es que te quiero mucho. I love you, son, and everything I do is because I love you. That's as much as an apology I'm gonna get. She's
Yeah.
not gonna say, "I'm sorry."
Right.
That's not gonna happen.
Nope.
That's not gonna happen. right?
So relevant.
Es que es para tu bien. Es para tu bien. It's for your good. It's for your
Mm,
good. Okay, I get
mm,
it,
mm,
mom,
mm,
and I
mm,
understand that, even with her though, man, the stuff that she had to go through and to get here and her history, and I take that into account and I go, okay, like what were her parents like?
mhm, mhm,
So, taking that into consideration and stuff. And so, but yeah, I think that's another component of it is we have to be humans. I tell my daughter, I'm sorry. Or she'll come and say, I want to play. And instead of just pushing her away, I'll be dead honest. I go, hey, you know how sometimes you're tired after school? Right now, dad is like really tired. And I know that if I play with you, I might get upset and it's not going to be your fault. And I
yeah,
don't want to do that. And so
yeah,
you just tell them what you're feeling, and I think that's the other
right,
thing is we don't, in a lot of traditional households, there's a hierarchy.
mhm,
And so and in a sec and, we can talk about too, like, being restorative, you can still be stern. That's the thing, though, and you don't just let your kids do what you want, but at the same time, there has to be some understanding, and we have to have compassion. We have to show them what do we do after we get mad, and what
mm,
could we have done differently? Because once they see that you're human, then they understand, okay, these are normal feelings, right? A lot of kids think their parents are superheroes. So when they feel it, they think they're messing up
mm,
because we don't show them how the sausage is made, you
mhm,
know? And so they need to see that, no, 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 like that's part of being human. And this
right.
is what we do to resolve it. We have to show them that.
Yes. Oh, I love this. I love this. And then that comes in the expense of us like navigating this, right? Where we are in a whole different generation and we are bicultural when you really think about it, right?
Yeah.
Like there are aspects from our culture, the motherland that we're implementing in our parenting, but there's also this other aspect of, the Americanized way and so it makes it so hard that we're doing so much work and it is tiring.
Yeah.
And so what would you say for a mom who is trying to be very intentional, right? And being a respectful parent and you know, perhaps utilizing these practices, pero she perhaps receives criticism from family members and not just a mom, right? It could be a dad, a parent who may view these approaches a little too permissive. Like what would you say
Yeah.
to that?
So I think it goes back to, you know, in our journey to be a good parent, you're never going to be the perfect parent,
Yeah.
right? You yourself, you just can't get to that. There is no, you can't be, it's human nature. You can be a phenomenal parent, you know, ultimately it's your kids. Your kids will let you know if you're the perfect parent, but we can't be the ones to kind of bestow that on ourselves, right?
Mm,
And so, with that being said, the first step though, in that journey, and I keep going back to this, is your own mental health.
mm,
And so what I mean by that is you have to understand the people in your life. And sometimes family members may not be, they just may not be healthy for you.
mm.
No one wants to hear that. And once again, I'm not a professional or anything, but that's where I'm saying go to a therapist. But what I will say though is we have to learn how to make those boundaries. And that's one of the hardest things. And even more so, and once again, and especially in some Latino communities, it's a very tough thing. But,
Yes.
the joke, once again, I joke about my mom a lot. It's how I process. No. So, but once again, the thing that I joke with my wife is I go, oh man, I go, my mom's gonna be 100. She's gonna live to be like 100 or 150, but just because she's gonna do it out of spite. She's gonna live to be 150 so she can outlive her sisters. She's gonna do it out of spite, And that's the joke I make is that like a lot of Latina, like those old school, like, Mexican moms live to be like real old because they're like, no, like they're just son tan amargos. I'm just gonna stay alive because to make your life difficult. It feels like that sometimes, right? Well, what can you do? What can I do with someone like that, right? And
Mhm,
so sometimes, and so that's why I don't want to give. There's no magic answer because each family is different.
mhm,
But you have to go on that journey talk to a professional, talk to someone that can help you figure out those boundaries. So some boundaries might look different. Like the way I do it is like, you know, with my mom, she might say, and so now to kind of go into more specifics, I'll use myself as an example. There are times where my mom will say something and I will say this, don't answer right away. You got to do the flow chart first, right? So in my
Mm.
brain, when my mom says something, the first thing I go is this worth mentioning or not? And then the second thing is, okay, what's her root cause? It's not just about our children. I say modeling is important because it's the root cause. Why is your spouse or partner or, why are they talking to you that way? Why are they
Mm.
saying this way? Why does your kid do this? So the second thing I ask myself is, okay, what is this a part of? Is this part of her own experience? My parents were old school in their aspect that like, yeah, my dad didn't necessarily give her flowers all the time or appreciate her or, those types of things, right?
Mhm.
And something in my head that really stuck is my mom would always be like, es que cuando yo me sentía mal y eso, es que tu papá nunca me ofreció un té.
Mm.
When I was sick and stuff, your dad would never bring me a tea. And something about that burned in my brain and what that represents, right?
Mhm.
And so I bring that up because, I could go on, hours, because here's
Yeah.
the thing, my dad worked nights. So until I was a freshman in high school, so from when I was born all the way up to when I was about 14, in the evenings, it was just me and my mom, and I had an older brother, he was around, but it was my mom. So really everything I saw was through her.
Yeah.
And so, and I bring that up because, okay, to go to the question of when they bring that up. All right. So now my mom says something to me and I go, okay, is it worth arguing? Is this tied to something that she's had to go through? And then lastly, you have to have a checklist of what's important to you. So I have like borders, right?
Mm.
And sometimes she may say something regarding like the way something my wife does. Not in a mean way, but once again, just in that Latina, that nature way, the whole like, oh, pues es que yo vi que encima del refrigerador tienes unas cajas y cosas y what, mom? You mean you want me to take that stuff down? Just say it. But anytime it's something directed or something that's ancillary to my wife, I shut it down because that is a boundary that I've set. That's the one thing she won't do, right? And sometimes she'll be like, oh, and I will just outright say, mira, tengo una casa, pago impuestos, soy un hombre hecho y derecho. Like,
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
outright call it because I know I don't do it, but I'm like, look, I'm a grown man that pays taxes. I put my own
Right.
pants on, brush my own teeth, like I have facial hair. Like, so I think I've done pretty okay, mom. You know what I mean? And
Right.
so sometimes you have to shut it down. And so I think it really is that checklist though. I think it's different for everyone. So you're going to that's what it is setting boundaries, but that's going to be different for different people. If there was a general answer, I would say that's kind of how, if you do have a family member that is constantly critiquing you and constantly doing these things, like it's just how much can you take? And I don't mean that in a like a dismissive way. I mean it in a literal sense of, man, my mom, and this not my mom, but like in general, like you have to ask yourself, like, or dad or aunt or cousin or whatever, just that other person that's critiquing, you have to ask yourself, what did they go through? And if you can just let it roll off your back, let it roll off your back. And if you
Right.
can't, then maybe something needs to be said. But once again, you have to have the tools. You can't just, if you've never gone to therapy or you've never talked to someone, when they do that and you set your boundary, you're going to just do it in the same old way that they did it. And now you're just doing the cycle. So
Right.
that's the asterisk is before you do that, though, you have to have the right tools and you got to get those from someone else, from an outsider.
Absolutely.
And once
Oof.
again, I'm just a guy. Like I'm figuring it out. Here's the thing. I'm not a single parent.
Mhm.
I don't have that stress.
Mhm.
And that's a saint. That's a whole other thing. And
Oh,
that's what I'm saying
absolutely.
is everyone's journey is different. And it's so hard. And I know like, it's about time. Like I am very blessed. And so I'm able to access these things, but a lot of people don't have that. Right. And
Mhm.
so, you know, it maybe it just starts on asking yourself questions and going from there. And like, this is not a end all be all. There's some general things and hopefully people pick things up. But at the end of the day, I always say that is like, I'm just a dad. I've been in education, but I'm not a single parent, or I'm
Right.
not working two jobs, or, it's easier said than done. And I think that's the
Right.
big thing is as long as you love your kids, I think that's what's important. But it's, this is all said from my perspective as like a man, as a male,
Mhm.
who has I have a master's degree. I have a family, I have partner that's there to support me, that I'm blessed. My mom is retired. She helps out. Like, so I'm also coming from that's the thing is we're all different. And so we're all on these different journeys, but I think it's just about trying to, at least, even if you can't do it professionally, at least try to think about why things are how they are. Because I will say,
Absolutely.
before I ever went to therapy, I had already figured, like, my therapist is like, wow, you have a lot of stuff that you've already kind of processed.
Mm.
Right. And so I had to start making those connections on my own and being like, why am
Mhm.
I so defensive in arguments? Why am I like this? Why am I like that? And so, at least that component, I think we can all do is just start reflecting on ourselves before we reflect on others, or even our
Yes.
own, our own children.
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the things that Alex, my husband, and I talked about before having kids is like, what are some things that you don't want to repeat in the way that you were parented? And what are other things that you do want to repeat, but perhaps modify? Alex's family is very different than my family. His are very like, you are kind of coexisting, you keep things reserved to yourself. And for me, like my family, we're very over exagerados. Like we
Yeah.
overexpress ourselves and our feelings and we put everything out there on the table. And so it definitely becomes a different dynamic when once you do become a parent. But having at least those initial conversations and reflect on your past and what you wanna change, what you wanna implement, it makes a big difference for
Yeah.
sure.
The thing I always say too is that if you are blessed enough and, or you do have a partner that's helping you,
Mhm.
sometimes you got to get your chocolate and their peanut butter, and they have to get their peanut butter and your chocolate, and then it's delicious, right? And so what I mean by that is like my wife and I, with our parenting styles, our backgrounds, her background is completely different. And so finding that balance. And it's only, my daughter's 5, and I really feel like it's only been in the last year and a half that we finally found a balance, right?
Mm.
Because we had to kind of, you know like, I feel like maybe I was a little too soft in the beginning, and because of wanting to do restorative practices, but more so because of my own fear of what if I open that door and then I let then I become this. But then she was a little bit more strict, but she's a high school counselor. She doesn't work with little
Mm.
kids. And so over time, we've really combined, and now we have found this middle ground where we are stern but fair. We just
Yeah.
basically treat her like a human.
Right.
Like, no one wants to be told what to wear. And
Right.
that's an example I always use of like when we get mad and we make our kids wear what we want them to wear, right? Who cares? And this
Yeah.
is why I say is it goes back to you're as an adult. Why do you really care what they wear? Because you
Mm.
don't want to be embarrassed. The key word there being you.
Mhm.
You don't want to be embarrassed for being you. You don't want to be able to pick their own outfit. And that's where you teach
Yes.
them those skills,
Right.
right? And so we have to start thinking about like, that's it. I think it's just treating our kids like humans, but that doesn't mean like we're treating them as our equals, right? And that's the thing about when we talk about being Latino and bringing some of like my mom's methods and kind of what I've learned, but combining them. And I think that's where some of us who had a strict upbringing maybe even have an upper hand, because here's the next thing is like restorative practices, this idea of what we call gentle parenting. Gentle parenting, when not done correctly, basically just raises a brat, a malcriado. And I'm going to put it out there. Maybe it's a hot take, but what happens is gentle parenting, when you're trying to talk to a kid and they're screaming and yelling, you're like, okay, let's sit, let's talk. In the beginning, it's going to take 2 hours. When my daughter started getting to that age where she was having the meltdowns and stuff, and she's testing boundaries, in the beginning, it was that mix. Sometimes I had to stick her in a chair. I said, no, you will sit in this chair. This is a timeout. Like, you need to sit here and, I don't know, like, is that the best thing or not, right? But then at the same time, then I could talk to her. I'm like, okay, let's talk about what's happening. How are you feeling? She's screaming and yelling. It takes 2 hours, 3 hours, right? But here's what happens is after 5 minutes, we're like, are you okay? It's okay. Just talk about your feelings. It's okay. And then we leave it. Well, now we're just being permissive. Like, we're not addressing the emotion. We're not separating the emotion from the behavior. We're not modeling how to work through those things. We are not showing them that there are rules,
Right.
and this is completely my own personal, once again, just philosophy and stuff. But the way I kind of talk to my wife about how I raise my kid, and this is something that, as a parent now, and just being an administrator and a dean at a school, that just things that I've learned watching lots of different families and myself. I teach and raise Violet and Felix. I raise them and teach them for the world that I want them to be in. But when they leave the house, I also teach them to live in the world we're actually in. And those are two different things, right? Because when we teach them, look, we live in a society where, you go to the schools, there's testing, you do what you need to do, you turn in your assignments, you are a good little soldier, and you do what you need to do. Okay. There's no room for a kid to be like, well, I want to talk about my feelings, And when they're 15 or 16 and they're working that job and they're learning how to work at a place, they're going to have a boss that's going to yell at them. Well, if they don't know how to handle that, they're going to be too soft. They're going to be too, and so, and it's hard, but it's like finding a balance of, like, Violet, what are you going to do to make the world how you want to be it? Right? The onus is on me and my family. Like, Violet, when you go out there, you will speak to people with respect. You will be kind. We will be kind, these types of things. But at the same time, if she has a teacher that is yelling at her and she comes home, she goes, this teacher's too tough. I can be like, okay, what are we going to do? What's your solution? How do we make them become solution oriented? And so it's finding that balance, and so we don't want to be permissive. Like, restorative conversations take a long time, but it's very important that you follow through with that stuff.
Absolutely. And I think that is just part of the process, right? In terms of how you want to, again, I think it's all based on how you want to model.
Yeah.
How do you want to model in front of your kids, and giving them those real life examples too, so that they see it, and it's almost like it can be ingrained in them on how to deal with these conflicts later on
Yeah.
in life. And so with you now being a dad, right? And, now practicing these approaches in your parenting, even if it's not every day, right? Like, you're
Yeah.
still, have you noticed any changes in your, like, stress level, patience, like, overall happiness? Like, how has your
Oh,
mental
I
health
mean,
really been?
when I started doing therapy, and I stopped, not because I wanted to stop, but the therapist is like, hey, man, at this point, we're just
You're
hanging out
cured. No.
yeah. I mean, but he's like, at this point, we're just talking, like, we're just hanging out. And because he had given me the tools, and I'm like, okay, if you're telling me these are the strategies, I'm going to use them, right? But, and so in my own parenting, and my stress levels are like, because now I understand these things. And in the beginning, it was hard, but after a while, but here's the thing, if you keep at it, eventually, like, my daughter, for the most part, I'm lucky. Like, I'm blessed. She's a really great kid.
Yeah.
And she, is able to describe her emotions. She does have the skill to walk back from the ledge, and not every day. Like, yesterday she was crying, and Felix was crying and my wife wasn't home yet. And I was just like, oh my God, guys. And I put, the TV on, right? And the thing is, we have a strict, like when we watch TV, we always sit with the kids and watch it. And the tablet, for long rides, the rule is if it's more than an hour, you can use a tablet. But if
Yeah.
not, we're not using it at home. We're not doing that.
Right.
But guess
Right.
what, man? In that moment, here, right? Or if
Mhm.
she comes in, sometimes she likes to get into the bed with us. And if it's before 7 a.m. and it's a Saturday, just here's my phone. You can watch a video.
Mhm.
Because who cares?
Right.
I got to take care of me too. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Here's one component. Well, so my stress, yes, because I now feel it and I see her doing it and I see that it's working. But even how I talk to my wife, of course it builds, it makes me feel better to know like I have a relationship where we can communicate. And, she knows me and I know her. And she knows that sometimes I need time to walk away and calm down because of how I was raised. And in my household, how we discuss is, like I said, we would yell and it was about cutting the other person. And she knows that. And so if I'm walking away, she already knows at this point in our relationship, he's walking away because he doesn't want to say something that, he might say something hurtful because that's how he's wired. So by him walking away, he will calm down. And when he comes to me, I know that he's going to be ready to tell me in a healthy way what's going on. And so she gives me that space instead of,
Yeah.
why are you walking away, or vice versa. And so, yeah, I feel like all around, I just do feel much more at peace. I feel much calmer with everything, and just reflecting and all that. And yeah, I mean, I feel like I told my wife the other day, so when I was a kid, I watched a lot of TV and I'm like, too much, like hours and hours, but it
Yeah.
was me and my mom at night. And unfortunately, those, gender roles, like she would cook and clean after work. And so I would be home and watching TV. And so, but I remember sometimes as a kid just being like, man, I wish I had a family like that. I wish I could I wish I could be like the sitcom families. I mean, I love early 90s sitcoms. Mwah. Chef Kids, man. Growing Pains, Cosby Show,
The spice step.
Step by Step, all that, And so I told my wife the other day, I go, you know what, babe? I go, I feel like right now I'm living a life like this is a show I would have watched. I feel like I am in a sitcom that I wanted.
Mm.
Right? And even for me, like I'm a huge comic book nerd and, all this other stuff. But the reason I bring that up is those were also resources, right?
Mhm.
Like I had my parents but there were also certain things that I saw and I wanted to aspire to. And so I feel like I am in that place right now. I feel
Yes.
like, and once again, I have our days. We all have our days, but
Mm.
it gets, all you can do is try to do your best.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, what would you say are the first steps? I know that you mentioned therapy, right?
Yeah.
But in the same time, like, what are some practical first steps that
Yeah.
our listeners can begin incorporating specifically with restorative practices?
Let me give you an actual, like a checklist, like a step
Yes.
by step, right? Like, once again, it's not always going to work, but it's a good little thing to have in your pocket.
Mhm.
Anytime your child is dysregulated, whether they're very sad, whether they are very angry, whether they're not doing what you're saying. Okay, before any of that, the first step of the checklist is, what is my current mental state?
Mm.
Okay. So you just got home from work 20 minutes ago and your kid's freaking out and you're stressed because you just got home. That's not the time to do that. Right. So the first step is, what is your current mental state? Am I in a state where, like, I think I could handle being yelled at for about 30 minutes right now. And I'm going to keep it real. Like, in the beginning, that's what you have to ask yourself. Like, am I ready to do this? Like, am I really ready right now to have this convo? Can I take this kid yelling at me for about 30 minutes right now? In the beginning, right? So first step is, what is your mental state? Second step is, when you do engage or once you do enter the situation, the second step is, what is your child's need and root cause?
Mhm.
And if you Google the words mistaken goal chart. Okay, mistaken goal chart. It's the perfect little cheat sheet. And you'll probably see different versions of it. But basically, it's like a little checklist. And it says, if your kid is doing this, then this is what they are doing, right? Or if your kid does this, usually we do this, which causes this, but we should do this instead. Like it's actual columns, right? And so, first step, what is your current mental state? Are you ready to, tussle? Are you ready to do this and stay calm? Second step, what is their root cause? Okay. It could be if you're holding a baby and all of a sudden you have, let's say, I'll use my own kids as an example. Let's say I'm holding Felix. I see Violet and she gets a crayon and writes on the wall. Okay. I know how my mom would have handled it.
Oh, yeah.
But what I do is like, okay, why did she do that? Well, I'm going to take a guess. I'm with Felix right now. I'm giving him lots of attention. And when she's doing that, she's trying to get my attention. So when I turn to her, I go, hey, Vi, I bet right now you're probably feeling like you want attention. I love you no matter what, even when I'm with Felix. So why don't you come over? Let me give you a hug. All right, now, here's the thing, Violet. We can't write on the walls. Like it makes a mess. And, does it look nice? No. Yeah. I mean, do you want to live in a house that's I don't dirty and with writing? And, me and mommy work. I know. All right. Well, you did this. So you're going to have to clean it. I'll help get watered stuff, but you're going to have to clean it. Now, here's the thing. She might freak out. And now I got 40 minutes of her being like, nah. That's going to happen. So now we're looking at almost an hour. So now the 40 minutes, I'm like, all right, well, now I got to, okay, hey, you're upset. I didn't say, look, it's okay to be mad. But I mean, that's the thing, right? So first step, what is our mental state? And are we ready to really put in the time if we're going to do this? Second step, trying to figure out the root cause, and that's like one example. But there can be, they want your attention. They're scared. They're tired. We went to Spain last year for a month and we took our kids, we all went as a family. And the largest temper tantrums that Violet has ever had were all in Spain.
Oh, no.
And it's like, okay, we're in a different country. We're away from home.
Yeah.
It's real hot today. And she's 4. Like adults don't even like, adults go on vacation and want this and that. And she's 4. So as an adult, as a parent, I'd be like, okay, she's hot. I'm going to pick her up. And I was like embarrassed because we were at a museum. Like this is literally hands down the biggest meltdown she's ever had. Oh, wow. Yeah. And Spain's different, man. So people will let you know, they'll be like, oh, es que niña, tienes que escuchar a tus padres. Like, look, dude, you're 70. Okay. Like you were around, you thought Franco was okay. Do not tell me right now how to raise my kid. Right.
Right.
But point being like, but as a parent, I had to be like, okay, it's hot. She's tired. Like she's upset, but she's 4. She doesn't know how to verbalize it. Picked her up. I put a little water on her neck, lifted her hair, blew her neck. She calmed down. She was hot. It was, and so then I'm like, hey, kid, I go, that is not okay. I go, how do you think that makes me? So now, okay, it's about me being embarrassed. That's really what it's about. But guess what? I'm going to let her know because I'm a human. So I'm going to say, okay, all those people walking by, how do you, that made me embarrassed. And I know it's not necessarily your fault or problem, but it did make me feel embarrassed, like just trying to figure out a way, right? So first step, what's your current state? Second step, what is their goal? And what is it that they're trying to achieve? And then, third step is like resolution, right? And just being like, okay, I'm really proud of you. Like this time you really like, I know you were upset for a bit, but then you started talking to me about your feelings, you calmed down, right? So the final component, and this is just an all-around component, we have to praise our kids when we see it. If we're trying to model a behavior or ask them to do something, you have to constantly tell them. Like, I'm like, Violet, we gotta go, we gotta go. So if Monday,
Yeah.
Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm losing it on her, and then Friday she finally gets ready and is out the door, I'm gonna say, whoa, Violet, are you an adult today? That is crazy. You got ready, you sat in the car, ate. Wow, thank you so much. And that's
Yeah.
constant praise and acknowledgement when they're doing what we want them to do.
Yes. Yes. Which is something that many of us did not get. We
No,
never got that like positive feedback, compliments. We never got that.
no, no.
No.
It
Yeah.
was always like, you're gonna wear, oh, eso te lo vas a poner. Or, a kid falls off a bike. Oh, es para que se te quita. If an adult said that to you, you know what I mean? That's things we talk
Yeah.
to the kids. There's certain aspects where we are the adult, but there's other things where, they are still humans,
Right. They
right?
have feelings,
Yeah.
Yeah,
When I
absolutely.
was a kid, my mom would make me and to this day, I don't eat it. She would make me eat liver and onions, right? Hígado. I don't eat it now as an adult. Why would I eat it as a kid? But she would make me sit there and eat it until I finished. Well, when do you ever do that to an adult? Now, I get it, okay? Like, they can't just eat French fries every day either. But,
Right.
you kind of have to be like, okay, well, maybe liver, maybe pata de puerco is not the food for a 5-year-old, right? Well,
Right. It's a process.
yes, it takes time. And so we have to kind of meet them in the middle,
Exactly. No, I love that. I really appreciate you sharing all of this wisdom and just reflection. I think it's definitely giving me an opportunity to reflect and just trying to modify, or I would say it affirms what we're doing.
Yeah,
That at the end of the day, yes, we want to incorporate these different practices than the way that we grew up, but also we are human and it's okay to mess up. It's
yeah,
okay that if one day you're not having a good day, I think it's just important to really think about your emotions as well and your overall well-being before you present it to your kids,
yeah,
before
yeah.
you're trying to resolve something that you can't even resolve on your own
And
first.
I would say, I use it for education, but I would say that's also for any partner or human
Mhm.
interaction. What is your current mental state before you go and talk to your spouse or partner?
Right.
And then what is their need or want or desire? And
Mhm.
how can you communicate that in a way that's respectful and honors both of you? The one
Absolutely.
thing is, I tell all the parents is, look, my mom wasn't perfect. I mean, she straight up, when I would have a temper tantrum, she would throw me in the shower and turn on the cold water. I'm going to take it there. Like, not all the time, but she was old school. But here's the thing. She loved me though.
Mhm.
And she's still in my life. She
Mhm.
still helps me with my kids. And so I think at the end of the day, love your kids and remind them that you love them. I think that's it. I think
Mm.
a lot of immigrants, it's hard. They come, and my parents did this, they equate happiness with money. I provide these things for you. But what we realize is like, no, we want time and love. So just love your
Mhm.
kid. Even if you mess up, or at the end of the day, if you really love your kid and you remind them that you love them, then I think that can really heal, and that can really get you past a lot of things.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I love this. I love this. And I think this is a great way to wrap up the interview. You really provided some really great nuggets here that I know our listeners are definitely going to take away from really insightful information, especially for our comunidad. I think that parenting is a lot of work. It's beyond taking care and nurturing our kids. It's also about reflecting on ourselves and how we're also taking care of ourselves
Yes.
during that process.
Yeah.
So,
It's like, you
yeah.
gotta, in an airplane, you put the mask on yourself
Yes.
first, right? That's what they say. So,
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, well, Alex, thank you so much.
yeah, thank you.